Good intro music. Welcome to Java with Josh. Today I've got Chris Kirsch, the CEO of runZero. We are going to kind of do a special presentation here where I'm going to roast runZero. And it's not like a comedic roast. Instead, the approach we're going to take is coffee based because it is Java with Josh. When you've got green coffee beans and you want flavorful coffee beans, the process is roasting those beans. It's putting them over heat for a while and draining the water out of them, and also kind of pulling some of those oils out of the beans as well. And that's how you develop a great flavor. Often we have webinars. I was a sales engineer in a past role, and we put things out there, and it's very deliberate and marketing focused. In Java with Josh, when I roast these companies, we're going to get a little deep, ask some critical questions. Those questions that those of us who are used to selling get asked all the time by potential customers when we're in a sales call, but we don't often see in the marketing side of things during these sorts of webinars. Chris is prepared. runZero is on our side on these, and we're also going to give away a Flipper Zero near the end of the podcast today, end of the live stream. Thank you to Gerald and the Simply Cyber community. I appreciate you all coming over and joining us. And I'm going to bring in our guest, Chris Kirsch.
All right. Hi, how are you doing?
Hey, doing great, Chris.
I've got my Java with me, so we're all good.
Very nice. So, Chris, I introduced you as the CEO, but your background is quite varied, and you've done some really neat things, in my opinion. Do you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. This is my first time as a CEO, so I can't say that I've been doing this all my life. I started out in cybersecurity back in Germany, sold crypto when that didn't mean currency, so encryption technology. That company got sold to PGP Corporation. Then I went to Encipher for hardware security modules, then joined Rapid7. That's where I met my current co-founder, HD Moore. And I was helping him basically turn Metasploit from an open source project into a commercial product. Metasploit is still open source, and of course your viewers will know that. So we built a commercial product on top of the open source core. Did that for a few years. Then I went into incident response over at Rapid7 in a product, I think that it's now called Insight IDR. It was User Insight at the time. And then I left Rapid7, went over to Veracode, built their product marketing team, and then I got a little bit bored there, and we had 3 acquisitions at Veracode, and I thought, okay, it's time for something new. I reached out to HD and said, like, hey, I'm going to take a few months off because he had taken some time off during his time at Rapid7. And that's when he asked me to join. And that was about a little over 2 years ago. So it's been a good journey.
That's really awesome.
Yeah. Outside of work, I have a few kind of like side passions. One of them is social engineering. So I participated in the CTF at DEF CON for social engineering. Did that twice in a row. Won it the second year. So I have a black badge from DEF CON. As part of that, I learned a lot about OSINT. So OSINT is something I'm super interested in. I participated a little bit in some things there, like the National Child Protection Task Force, which tries to find either missing people or predators online. Then got a little bit involved in Trace Labs, but not all that deeply, but did that more as a participant and once as a judge. Mm-hmm. And apart from that, I've got an interest in like learning all the skills that you see in heist movies. So yeah, I did a talk on pickpocketing. I did a talk on like cold reading as a psychic, and like all sorts of weird things that keep life interesting.
Very nice.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I'm gonna bug you later to see if I can get some recordings of those
Hmm.
talks if they're out there.
They're up on YouTube.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, then I'll definitely want to grab those later and share those with the community. Um, I very much enjoy heist movies and the idea as well. It's really the only way I can get my wife interested in what I do is by relating things that we do in cyber to heist movies. They are her favorite as well. So
Great.
I'm right there with you. And I did not know about the black badge. That's really awesome. I've gotten to meet Aleth, and
Yeah,
she
she's great.
also won one of those, and I think
Yeah.
probably competed alongside you on a couple because I know she's done a few.
I think I'm not sure if she competed during the
Oh,
years when I was in. She won 1 or 2 years after me,
okay.
and I think it was possibly her first
I
time
think her.
competing.
Okay.
I'm not even quite sure. I might be mixing this up.
Yeah. I know
But
she's
yeah,
told her story on a couple
yeah,
places, and there's a Darknet Diaries that she
yes, she's
covered.
got many great stories.
Oh
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Big fan.
yeah,
uh, and it's so my last boss was
hmm,
actually worked alongside you and HD at Rapid 7, and always spoke your praises.
thank
Great
you.
guy, Kent.
Yeah,
And when I first started talking to you about a year ago
yeah,
about the product, you guys were Rumble. Now you're runZero.
correct.
Uh, what what made you both want to start this business? To start Rumble and runZero. What was
Sure.
kind of the impetus of that?
Yeah. So when HD and I were at Rapid 7, we heard a lot from customers that they said, hey, all the stuff you're doing is great. And, we were always talking with customers about new ideas of could we build this or that. And what we often heard is, hey, these are great ideas. It's really interesting stuff. But we even have problems figuring out what we have on the network. And that's a problem that still exists today. I was floored when I talked to more companies years later, and they still can't figure out what they have on their network. And when you talk to people why they're frustrated, it's usually because they either use a vulnerability scanner or an EDR agent to go after the problem. And when you do that, you're using either an agent that goes on a device or
Hmm.
you're trying to log onto a device with an authenticated scan. When you ask people why they're frustrated with asset inventory, it's because they don't have visibility into any of the unmanaged devices and
Mm.
development test boxes in the corner, IoT devices, OT devices. And if you think about the approach, you can't put an agent on a device that you don't even know exists or that you don't have credentials for. You can't do an authenticated scan with a device that you don't have credentials for.
Hmm.
And then the world got more complex as people started moving to the cloud and as COVID hit, more remote workers and so on. So the spread of where you have assets became broader. And so HD had the idea to first start solving the hardest problem, which
Hmm.
is the unmanaged devices on-prem and the IoT and OT devices. And
Yeah.
he's got a lot of experience with active scanning from
Hmm.
Metasploit, from Project Sonar, where he scanned the entire internet and so on for research purposes. And
Hmm.
when you think about Metasploit, you enumerate the network,
Hmm.
then you fingerprint devices, then you
Yep.
exploit them, then you go into post exploitation. I'm simplifying a little bit here, but
Yeah. No,
broadly
kill chain
speaking,
right
I
there.
think
Yeah.
that's true. And so if you think about the first two of those steps,
Hmm.
enumeration and fingerprinting, those essentially are asset inventory when you're thinking about a network that you can scan. So
Yeah.
oftentimes on-premise, sometimes cloud, but cloud, there's better ways to go after the problem.
Yeah.
And so he built a scanner from scratch because he said, well, Metasploit knocks over some devices. I
Hmm.
know why, and I want to not do that with a
Right.
scanner.
Right.
Also, Metasploit is looking for vulnerabilities, same as vulnerability scanners and so on, and trying to
Right.
and actively exploiting them, right?
Mm-hmm.
So he said, I want to send only safe traffic, but figure out as much as I can from the device through what the device gives up itself, but also through the surrounding infrastructure. So we look
Mm-hmm.
at where other tools look at individual ports and
Mm-hmm.
look at that individually to figure out what something is. We look at the whole OC stack. We also look at all the surrounding infrastructure in terms of what it tells us, mash that up, and then decide what is a device. And that gives us much higher accuracy and much more detail.
Oh yeah. I've been thinking about this ever since I heard of the product and demoed it and got my hands on it. But the first the first control for almost any framework, or one of the first controls, is asset inventory.
Mm-hmm.
And asset management tends to be one of the biggest key pieces. Do you think that you all are solving a greater problem in the environment? Something that's gone unseen or
Yes, I think so,
gone unmet?
because most products think about asset inventory as a secondary thing.
Mm,
You do you count the things on the network so that you can do a vulnerability scan. You count the
right.
things on the network so that you can do NAC.
Hmm.
But nobody does the asset inventory part really well. And
Yeah.
that's been hurting companies a ton. So as a result, they find devices, like they get compromised and they find a device that they didn't even have in the CMDB.
Oh, yeah.
When you look at the industry, I think one of the challenges is that the CMDB is often managed by the IT people.
Hmm.
And when I talk to IT people, they care only about the devices that they manage because they feel responsible for those.
Right.
And the security people care about the unmanaged devices, but they don't control the CMDB.
Hmm.
And so this is why you have a lot of tension between those two groups. And what we often do is we have our primary customer is the security team. First and foremost, the team that does the vulnerability scanning.
Hmm.
Secondary one is the incident response team. And then also we have a lot of pen testers. So it's kind of that group. And they often work with the IT team to then feed our data into ServiceNow. We've got a ServiceNow integration,
Hmm.
service graph integration. And that helps get both people better aligned, right? Both teams.
Right. Right.
Because if you're in an incident response case and you don't see the device that's alerted on an outbound bad known IP,
Yeah.
that's a problem. Then
That's
you're on a
you
wild
like.
goose chase, right?
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, we've been talking about this product.
Mm-hmm.
I know that you've prepared a demo for us. This one, I know you've got a script and a plan,
Yeah.
but would love to intro just the platform overall, and then
Yeah.
I know we've got some interesting conversation. We've talked a
I,
little
I,
bit
I
before
know
about
that
pen testing.
I heard your intro about the roasting, so I'm prepared to be thrown off track.
We
Yeah.
will get to that,
Yeah.
and I know you're prepared, and
Okay. All good. All good.
yeah.
All
I
right.
don't want to upset anyone, but I'm gonna bring up your screen that you shared,
Okay. Perfect.
and
So I'd love to give a little bit of an overview. So we provide asset inventory from IT to OT to cloud to remote workers.
Mhm.
Um, Other solutions often struggle with parts of those. Some only do cloud, but don't do on-premise. Some
Right.
do managed IT, but can't do unmanaged IT or OT. Others focus on OT, but can't do the rest very easily. And so the way we do this is through a combination of two approaches. It's an API data sources, so
Mhm.
other third-party sources, and those, hold on, I can show you those here. So some examples here. So we connect to different cloud infrastructures and virtualization platforms
Mhm.
to pull in data that way. That's a really good way to get to inventory cloud environments very quickly. You
Okay.
can also active scan them, but it's and you get some additional information, like some of the ports and installed products. But
Sure.
the APIs are a really good, fast way to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. Then we integrate with directory services. So these do a number of different things. So, for example, Google Workspace is a really good way, if your organization is using that, to get all of the remote users as well, right? Even like private phones and those kind of things, you can inventory really well. It gives you more depth in terms of some of the serial numbers and CPUs and those kinds of things. Active Directory and Azure AD gives us user information, and we use that information to also map asset owners, because if you just knowing that you have a device is not enough. Like if we think back, the Equifax breach was a while ago, and only a few years later in a congressional hearing it came out that they did know that they had a vulnerability on that box, and they did notify somebody to fix it. It's just they had the wrong owner in their CMDB, so they notified the wrong person, right? So a little thing like ownership can have an outsized impact on your security posture. And then we integrate with EDR. So again, that helps us get visibility deeper into the devices, the managed devices. Doesn't do anything for unmanaged devices and IoT, OT, and also for devices off the network. And you can also answer questions, for example, like which endpoints am I missing CrowdStrike on? Really important when you're trying to get to full coverage. Like I've seen some cybersecurity insurance policies say you need to have EDR on 98% of your assets. So if you don't know what your assets are and you can't measure how many you have them on, that's a problem.
Yeah.
Then we can also pull in internet scan data. So most of our customers use us on the internal network, but we can also look outside in. And for those kind of things, people like to import Census or Shodan for one of two reasons. One is to help target what they want to scan. So if it's not just subdomains and ASN blocks, but it's also things that are outside of those things, and you want to target based on certificate information, like an OU or something like that. You can pull that in, and you can then say, all right, and now we want to use that starting point for runZero to scan, and we give you additional information on the assets that Census and Shodan might not be able to tell you.
Right.
Then mobile device management, again, figuring out where you have coverage. Do you have any devices that are not in your MDM that should be, and also devices off network, and then vulnerability scans. So we can pull in the vuln information to enrich the we can make the asset inventory data better in some cases. And we don't just import whatever, let's say, Tenable says an asset is.
Yeah.
We actually use their data, their raw data, to get to better fingerprints of what an asset is than Tenable itself does, which is kind of interesting. It's kind of some of HD's magic behind the scenes.
Oh, nice.
Then we give you the context of you have a vulnerability. And we give you the context of like, where does this thing sit in the network? What is it, and what other things is it connected to?
Yeah.
And then we also help you figure out your coverage. Do you have vulnerability scanning coverage for all of your subnets? Because we often find subnets that customers didn't know they had.
Ooh.
Right. So this is
that's huge.
the data sources, the API integrations. And then we also have, and this gives you the depth and breadth for the unmanaged and IoT and OT devices. You scan the network, and then you get a really deep understanding of what the network, what the assets are that are on the network, how they're connected, how the subnets are connected, and so on. So we'll go into some of those details in a little bit, because that's a big differentiator of the product. And when you think about a pen test, so for a pen test, probably you wouldn't be using a lot of these connectors. For a pen test, you probably would use mostly the scanning. And so I'll show some of the examples of how that can be useful in terms of enumerating a network and
Hmm.
finding footholds, finding pivot points on the network, internally or externally, internal and external pen tests.
Okay, awesome.
Somebody here on the chat is asking, and by the way, I can't read all of the questions. If there are questions that fit into the context here,
I'll pull them back
happy
if
to answer, right? Somebody's asking, is this like the same way as Qualys? So
Hmm.
Qualys, the main product that Qualys has is an authenticated vulnerability scanner. They do authenticated and they do agent-based.
Hmm.
What they do is they try to show you all of the vulnerabilities that you
Hmm.
have on a network and come back with a thick report that gives you full coverage.
Right.
We don't do that.
Hmm.
What we tell you is all of the things that you have on the network. What is connected to the network?
Yep.
If you compare that, this was in a global telco, and it wasn't Qualys, it was Tenable, but they're all fairly similar in terms of the vulnerability scanners. The customer came back to us and said, hey, there's this
Hmm.
one device on one certain IP, and Tenable is telling us it's I think it was a CentOS Linux system, but
Hmm.
doesn't give us more information. And runZero claims this is an F5 load balancer with this model number and this firmware version. Like,
Yeah.
which one is it? We want to know which one's true.
Right.
And so I did a little bit of research, and
Hmm.
I found out that the F5 boxes, and I hope I'm not remembering this wrong, but your listeners will probably tell me if I do, that the F5 load balancers are based on CentOS.
Okay.
Right? So the underlying firmware is based on CentOS. But what was really useful to that telco was knowing that it's an F5 load balancer, because that tells
Ah.
him what the thing is
Yeah.
and who's responsible for updating it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's a huge difference. Another thing that uh, we tend to be better at than the vulnerability scanners,
Hmm.
but it's different, not better at, right?
Yeah.
It
Yeah. Because
is
there's a purpose and a use for those, right? And this is
exactly.
not necessarily the same.
Yeah, yeah. So where we are really good is finding when you have a big zero-day vulnerability.
Hmm.
So think of, God, Log4j was a big one, or even some of the SolarWinds things were big,
Yeah.
or even just it's not maybe it's not even a vulnerability, but it's a thing that you really want to find on the network. Like
Yeah.
the FBI was raiding the headquarters of a company called PAX,
Yep.
and they were making these handheld POS terminals where you swipe the credit card or put it
Yep.
in, because they were under the impression, and I'm not sure how this panned out, by the way.
Hmm.
Just with that caveat, they were under the impression at the time that somebody had inserted malware into these devices in the supply chain. So
Hmm.
they shut down the offices, raided the offices, and did a full sweep there. So now, if you are a retailer, you want to
Hmm.
know really quickly if you have these kind of devices, right?
Right. Right.
You want to know, do I have them? Where do I have them?
Hmm.
And then, create a plan to get them off. Another example was a city, like a
Hmm.
guy who runs the network of a city, and he says, like, I think it was like Ubiquity IP cameras or something like that. They got breached,
Hmm.
and all the usernames and passwords were public. So now he was worried, like, do we have, like, somebody asked him, like, do we have any of these cameras on the network? He's like, I don't know. So he came to
Yeah.
us and we're like, yes, we can help you with that. So
Right.
just knowing what you have on the network and then taking that off. And in the case of a zero-day vulnerability, think about it this way. With
Hmm.
Log4j, a lot of different products were affected, and it was kind of like trickling out, like which ones were affected.
Oh yeah.
So the vulnerability scanning vendors, the way they work with their approach is they have to create a vulnerability check that
Hmm.
gets run at scan time. So they have to figure out, okay, which applications are affected, which versions. They will create the check. That takes a few days, often a week. In the case of Log4j, it took 2 weeks because so many products were affected.
Yeah.
Then, as a customer, you download those vulnerability checks,
Hmm.
and you have to rescan the network because the testing is done at scan time, right?
Mm.
So now you might have a maintenance window that you need to wait for. So
Right.
that extends it for another week. So now you're looking at 3 weeks till you know what devices are affected.
Yeah.
The vulnerability check will usually look at, really at the version and, installed libraries and all of that stuff, because it's an authenticated check. It can actually look inside the machine. What we do is we scan the environment. We collect everything that we can through an unauthenticated scan. And it's more than you think you could. Actually, we're 25 minutes in. If your listeners now go to runZero.com and start the trial, you will probably have an inventory of your home network if you're sitting at home before the end of the session here, right? So it's actually super fast to do that. So, and we collect all of that information. And so with the 0-day vulnerability with us, you don't have to rescan. You just have to ask the right question of the database to see, do I have any SolarWinds, PAX devices, et cetera, et cetera. So you can get the answer in seconds if you know what you're looking for. But this only works after the vulnerability is broken, because sometimes we can't tell you the version number. So, 6 months later, we can't tell you if this thing is already patched. But at the moment when the story breaks, we can be the fastest to give you the answer. And that's because we decouple the scanning from the assessment, right? The vulnerability scanners assess at the point of scanning, and we first scan, and then we help you find very specific things.
Gotcha. Holding that inventory. Would you mind, do you want to show us a little bit of what that ends up looking like?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that. All right. So we start out with I want to talk a little bit about some of the use cases and
Sure.
take you through that way, and then we'll talk a little bit behind the scenes and how it works, and also how to use it on a pen test. So some examples here. So we do the baseline asset inventory. That's often where customers start. They don't know what they have on the network, and the different sources that they have, their EDR, their vulnerability management, their CMDB, can't agree on how many devices they actually have on the network. So one example is we sell to a data storage vendor. They started out and bought a license for 10,000 devices because they thought that's how much they had. They're now at 125,000. So sometimes people can be really, really off, right? And at a global high-end fashion retailer that baked us off against ServiceNow. They were rolling out ServiceNow. They were having trouble getting to the true asset inventory. Basically, they had acquired 10 to 15 fashion brands. So M&A, global organization. And they were having trouble getting credentials for all of the subsidiaries, right? And so ServiceNow is based on either agent-based or authenticated scans. And so when we baked off against ServiceNow, we found 2.5 times as many devices. So that's a big gap. So ServiceNow missed 60%. So now at that company, we are feeding our asset inventory into ServiceNow to give them better visibility. And this helps both the security and the IT team.
That's huge.
And then, so here we're seeing a frequency of the demo environment here. A frequency of the most common operating systems and the least common operating systems, right? And so if you're thinking about this from a pen tester lens, I would always look at the least common, because these are the things that are probably not front and center in the mind of the IT people that manage the environment. Those are kind of like the weird ones, the ones that either are forgotten about or that for some reason can't get patched.
Right. This printer that we've had, this camera that was initially set up a while ago, and we didn't need to replace it. We just left it up there. Added more.
And then, you can do the same with device types here. And I'll go into some more of this when we go a little bit deeper.
Sure.
Then the next thing, after you've scanned your entire network and also pulled in some of the things through the API data sources, then you start analyzing. So you can find things like, for example, here, I've run a query and I've said, hey, give me all the things that have a public IP address and use the protocol RDP, right?
Nice.
So, right. So anything that lets you log on remotely from the from the internet through RDP. That's often an attack vector that ransomware gangs use, or folks that try to get initial access.
Oh yeah.
Also very useful for pen testers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if we're looking at a specific machine here, so this is a Windows Server 2012, and we are seeing, and we discovered it through IPv6. There is a secondary addresses. We see a public and a private address here, and then when we look at these here, there's an RDP port open here on 3389, right?
Ah, gotcha.
Right. So this is a way of how you can find those kind of things. Then also what's interesting, this is I'm zooming in a little bit, and I think this might be one of the same machines. Here you're seeing the red bubbles are publicly addressable IP space, and the green bubbles are private.
Okay, yeah.
And so we can actually show you which devices are multi-homed. So,
nice.
Right. So this is not only an initial machine that you can take over, but you also see where it pivots into. Right. And so this can be public to private, or it can be private between two subnets. So for example, a pharmaceutical company brought us in because their OT production line was ransomware, and they figured out that they had one machine that was dual homed in both the IT and the OT network, and it shouldn't have been. Right. So they said, all right, that's a big gap. And the agency that supported them in the cleanup recommended, hey, you should find a tool like runZero that can show you this kind of stuff.
Yeah. That's huge.
Another example is this is in a large tech company. Is that the right query? I need to give me 1 second here.
That's okay.
I have the wrong query here. So in a large tech company, they were scanning their facility network. So think smart building automation. Big tech company, they have campuses all over the world. They have a ton of different sensors. And so they were scanning that network. And trying to find in a machine. Well, okay, here we've got one. Here we're seeing it has a Wi-Fi adapter, and it has a 5G card or something like that in it.
Yeah.
And this is something that we found scanning only with an authenticated scan externally, right? So we can see quite deep into the device, even though we don't have credentials or an agent on the device. So with this organization, they saw a laptop on their smart building network that should be completely, firewalled off, and somebody had a laptop that had a 5G card in it, and so they shut that down. So this is the kind of things that you can find when you're looking for it.
Identifying that shadow IT.
Yeah. I talked about SolarWinds, right? Earlier on, we had one customer that wanted to find all of the SolarWinds devices because they'd gotten a letter from the SEC. They're publicly listed quick service restaurant chain, global chain. And they got a letter from the SEC, and they said, hey, you need to tell us if you are vulnerable to the SolarWinds issues. As otherwise, if you don't disclose that to your shareholders, you open yourself up to lawsuits.
Yeah, we've seen that can go deep.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are putting teeth behind that now.
Yeah. And so they were trying to figure it out with, I think, Qualys at the time. They couldn't figure that out. And so a channel partner brought us in, and we started the rollout, or it was a POC at the time, on a Thursday. And by Sunday night, we'd inventoried the whole network, found a few SolarWinds boxes that they didn't know they had. And then, they were able to satisfy the requirement from the SEC, and we got the PO a week later. So that's an example for that. or
Yeah.
also Exchange servers. It sounds weird that you might not know all of the Exchange servers that you have, but when you have
Yeah.
a big vulnerability that you need to find, here, I mean to see, yeah, we've got a
Well,
few in this environment here, right? So it's
it's
all,
normal.
like,
We've got a client that
yeah,
is they bought 7 different other companies and have now the CISO is in charge of the IT for all of them,
yeah,
and he wasn't part of any of the decisions in how they all came up,
yeah,
and is running a pen test to find out like where do I need to focus,
yeah,
because it's one of those things you come in you don't know.
yeah.
Yeah,
We
good.
have one company that uses us just for M&A targets
Mm.
because you don't need any credentials. You just
Hmm.
need a one device on the network that's allowed to scan.
Uh-huh.
And so they can do an inventory really fast and get an idea of what they're buying or what they're onboarding,
Nice,
right?
nice. I know there's questions. I'm tagging them and marking them. I don't want to mess
Perfect.
up your flow. And
Thank
that's
you.
also why I'm not asking too many questions now. I have a whole section where I'm gonna ask a ton of questions, and
Fantastic.
I am saving these so I can bring them up later.
Okay,
So
perfect,
I know
perfect.
chat can be distracting. So
All right. Then here, I'm just bringing up a different view here. So we had a customer that it was a hospital network. They'd
mhm,
acquired a few more hospitals, and um, they found like a weird thing, which was they found some parts of the network that had a lot of Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, which is their EDR solution that they
mhm.
put in through an integration.
Right, right.
And they couldn't find any tenable scans on for those devices. And they were
Huh.
thinking like, what the hell is going on? And then they investigated, and it
Uh-huh.
was that the sysadmins at the acquired entity had just put up, like all the firewall filters because they didn't want to be bothered by the scanning.
Oh wow.
So it helps you find out also these kind of like weird things, right? And it's a
Right,
very
right.
simple query. It's just like, EDR name is this, and it's not, in this. Or another query that's super popular is to say, show me all the Windows devices that don't have CrowdStrike on them,
Mhm.
right? And that gives you some of the coverage gaps. So this is,
I
large
do
oil. Yeah.
have one question real fast. You've mentioned that this is going to identify some things that aren't normally identified or might not be identified by Tenable or Qualys or
Hmm.
even your Solar Winds on its own. And I know HD has the experience with Metasploit and Nmap and knows what can knock things over. How does this all work that you're able to identify things that
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
tools can't while also not knocking things over? And I
Yeah.
know there's got to be some secret sauce in there that you want to keep secret,
Yeah.
but is could you give a little bit of insight on how that
Sure.
works?
I would see those two things separately. So
Okay.
the reason why uh, Nmap and vulnerability scanners can knock things over is because they do a few different things. The
Hmm.
first one is they sometimes send malformed IP traffic.
Yep.
And because different flavors of Linux respond differently to a malformed packet,
Hmm.
and that's how you can fingerprint different flavors of Linux. Um, that can knock over some of the more fragile devices. So, um, some of the embedded devices have custom TCP/IP stacks or super old TCP/IP stacks that
Hmm.
freeze up or reboot the machine if they get a malformed packet.
Right.
So that's not good. Second thing is these kind of things send security probes. So, think
Mm.
of SQL injections and those kind of things that can really
Hmm.
mess with devices.
Yep.
So again, that's something that we do not do. We only send benign traffic. We only send standard conforming IP traffic.
Hmm.
Then the next thing is just the sheer amount of traffic per node. So we have and I'm going to go into the setting here.
Hmm.
We have a setting where you can dial that in quite specifically. So there's two things. One
Hmm.
is the scan rate. This is how many packets exit the scanner, right?
Yeah.
How many bullets we're shooting per second. Maybe you shouldn't use military analogies here, but then there's also a second one, which is the maximum host rate. And this is the maximum number of packets which each host is allowed to receive per second.
Okay.
Right? So you see that these are different. So I'm sending 1,000 packets, but I'm only allowing 40 per host. So how does that make sense? We go round robin. We go 40 packets first one, 40 packets second one, 40 packets third one. We go the full range and then come back. Right?
Okay.
And so that makes sure that the individual device is not overloaded.
That makes sense.
But we still get through a large range in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
And then the last thing is, and these are some devices that are super finicky, and I'm gonna have to, let me just pull up a slide deck here. Give me 1 second.
Sure.
So there are certain devices that just react super badly to any scan traffic. Like even if you take all of these examples, there's like these ones here, right? Print servers, the ZebraNet and the Lantronix. There are notorious for falling over when you just do a regular port sweep, because the way it's been explained to me is you connect to this one port, and they then expect a certain command as a next thing. And if that command doesn't follow, then the controller just doesn't do anything. It's just in a holding pattern, right? So you need to actually reboot the device. So what we do is, for those, I call them Snowflake devices. We have a sequence in how we scan things, that we identify these devices safely first and then fingerprint them differently.
Nice.
Right.
Okay.
So it's a number of things that we do, and so this deck is actually quite handy right now when you're talking about scanning safely. Right. This is all. These are all devices that and this is sanitized screenshots. All devices we scanned in utilities, right? In customer environments, in production. So there is the industrial control systems and these things, which you see everywhere, but they're like cheap little things. PLCs, backnet devices, so that's building automation. And then, like a lot of other stuff. There is one fun one at the end that I just want to show. Because the first time we saw this one, it was like drone detectors. We've seen those on utilities and also in railway companies, where they're trying to detect drones and then do something, like alert or whatever. And so first time we fingerprinted that one, that was interesting. And you see here the type of things that we tell you about the device. We tell you it is this type of hardware, right? We tell you this is the embedded system operating system, but we also tell you this device is this operating system is end of life.
Wow.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's quite impressive. All without knocking it over, without needing to be authenticated,
and without credentials. And we take screenshots of any web interface we see.
Ooh.
Right. So this is super helpful when you have the scanner, which we call Explorer, in a network that like from where you're sitting at the console, you might not be able to access that part of the network.
Right.
But you have it in the console and you can see what it is. And it sometimes helps if we, maybe it's like an unknown device or a custom application is a good example. We can't fingerprint that, but if you see a screenshot, it's super helpful. Or if it's a super exotic device, right? We're starting to run out of time.
Yeah.
So we can. By the way, I can go a little bit long if you like.
Unfortunately I can't. I have to check in with my red team.
Okay.
Following this one.
All good. So shall we pivot to how to use it in pen tests, or shall we do questions?
No, let's talk a little bit about how you would use it in a pen test.
Perfect.
And then I think we'll be able to cover the questions.
Yeah. Great. So what I would do is the scanner is super fast, and with a few provisions, you can actually scan an entire RFC 1918 space overnight. Wow. So for that, you would do things like only scan subnets with active hosts. So basically, we sample the subnet with a 3% sample rate, and if we find active hosts, we scan the full thing, and if not, we don't. You can also, if you want to accelerate more, you can just do a ping sweep first and only
Okay.
scan hosts that respond to a ping. But depends, not all devices respond to a ping, so you're going to lose some, but it depends on how quickly you need to scan.
Okay.
Order of magnitude.
If I might,
yeah.
Sorry, for an external pen test, do we need
Yeah.
to have an explorer on the in the network already, or are we able to scan from an
For
external?
I'm gonna need to switch to a different environment here, but I can show it to you real quick.
Okay.
So on console, so for an external pen test, you can choose a what we call hosted zone. So it's basically a hosted scanner.
Okay.
And then you can do an external view. So I've actually prepared something here. This is not a customer or any particular reason other than I needed some live data.
Yeah.
So here you can target through an ASN block. So this is an
Okay.
ASN IPv4 block,
Yeah.
or through domains. And so if I'm not going to actually do the scan, but I'm just going to let it pull that. So it pulls up the ASN, the range, and then it also pulls all of the subdomains that it finds for that domain, and then you can scan. We don't do anything that violates CFAA, so you should be good to scan. You can also exclude countries. For example, we have country block information in here as well, and or limit it to a certain country, something like that. And so
that speeds up like the whole discovery scan.
Yeah. And our scan, because we don't do a full vulnerability scan, and we focus on very specific ports and queries for asset inventory, we tend to be about 10 times faster than a vulnerability scan.
Wow.
Because we send fewer packets. I mean, you can always crank up the scan rate, right? And 1,000 is like super safe. Like for an external, like 5,000 should not be a problem.
Sure.
And sometimes you really crank it up all the way. We scan entire countries for like stress testing and of the engine and of the database and all of that stuff, which is also fun, but pretty outside the scope of this.
Is this for those? Is it similar to Shodan where they're able to just scan the internet, or would you only want to do that with assets that you've signed a contract to do a pen test on?
I would probably only do it with assets where you have permission or where you have like legally, I believe you're in the clear, but then again, I am not a lawyer. Consult a legal professional.
I'm with you. I would wait until I have.
But yeah, I mean, consent is always better. Yeah. So then, in terms of deploying the explorers, you can run this thing on any box. So some people run it on bare metal hardware or virtual machines. I've seen people deploy it on a Raspberry Pi. I've even seen people, own an IP camera and then install the Explorer on an IP camera and scan from there, so that you get a different point of view. So, like the architecture this thing runs on is pretty broad. It's all written in Go. Since this is a pen testing audience, like the Explorer is basically written like malware. It's got no dependencies. It runs on any platform. Right. So very, very useful for pen tests. You can also install this on a Raspberry Pi and use it as a Dropbox.
Yeah. I was wondering if you could just drop it somewhere.
Yeah. And
could you install it on a thumb drive?
Or like on a thumb drive? Well, it needs to have an IP address so that it can reach out to something.
Sure, an external.
But what you could, and this is an animated GIF here. This is an example of our command line offline scanner. So you'd use this, like if you had a thumb drive, like a USB flash drive, you could put this on there, scan from the machine that you connected to.
Yeah.
And then it outputs a JSON file. It never phones home. So it's useful for that use case. Or where a lot of people use it is for air gap networks, or if you just do not want to have an outbound connection to your console during the engagement.
Drop your tap, collect, and then later go pick it up.
Yeah. And then, if I was pen testing a network, I'd probably look at, least seen protocols on the network. So look at those, because those are usually weird ones that you might be able to get into.
Yeah. I was thinking for threat hunting as well. Like
least seen ports. right? The screenshots we talked about, so you can just scrub through the screenshots and say like, hey, like, what is this thing? That sounds
Yeah.
interesting. Typically you can scrub through something visually much faster
Oh yeah.
and get an idea. Then unusual ports. So here I'm looking at the service inventory and I'm saying, protocol FTP, but not port 21. So getting those. Then we have an outlier score. So this is basically which one of these are not like the others, and it's a score from 1 through 5. I have synthetic data here, and it's not a very big data set. This works best if you're scanning a super large network that's fairly homogeneous, and you're trying to find the weird stuff. And so when you click on any of these and go into the information, you'll see certain where is it? I need to find it. You'll see certain things that are highlighted in yellow. Yeah, here. And these are the attributes that are weird. Here it says there's only 2 of those in the environment.
Whoa.
Right? And so you can figure out like, why is something weird, and it might matter or it might not matter. If you have a bigger environment, I would dial that up to like score of like 2 or a 3, sometimes a 4, and you'll find the really weird ones. You'll find the machine that has, I've seen like routers that have or switches that have thousands of ports that actually crashed our interface, and that's why I now have to like manually load those, and we've changed the interface.
Oh wow.
But
so I want to before we get too late, let people know about the giveaway. So
yes.
I've got a Google form out on newvillage.org/giveaway, and put in your information there, and I'm going to go through the outputs of those and pick a winner, and then reach out to you, and then we will announce on all the socials who the winner is after we've communicated. That also, we're going to actually have this thing shipped to you, so I'm going to need some information on your address and your IRL name, those sorts of things. I'm not going to share this with anyone. This is something that I've set up, and we'll keep so that we can get you your prize, get you your Flipper Zero.
I think not share anybody except with me, right? Because I need to send it out.
Because you'll need to know who to send it to. Yeah.
But only for
anyone
winner.
Who's like, oh no, they're harvesting credentials or anything like that. Nope, not doing that.
Yeah.
I promise.
Great.
I don't want to be legally responsible for that.
Yeah. So what else is interesting? I think in a pen test, looking at any MAC address ages, like MAC addresses are reserved at a certain point in time. We track that in runZero. And so you can say, show me all devices that have a MAC address that was reserved more than 5 years ago. Those are typically old devices, right? Where you can crank that up. So that's in addition to the end of life date. That's a really good one.
Nice.
And then we have certain saved queries that you can look at and just get an idea of, like, sometimes it's helpful to just see the query, and sometimes the query itself is useful. And so, for example, here, if you're not familiar with this regulation, like in the US, certain Chinese vendors are not allowed to be on critical infrastructure networks. So we identify all of those, and we've put together a list because there's all of these OEMs and subsidiaries and all of that stuff, right?
Help you with their CMMC and
exactly. So you can run that query. You don't have to put it together yourself, and then you'll find all of these devices. So we've got where's the vendor? Huawei, Hikvision. Those are fairly common, and then Dahua, right?
Right. So what does pricing like this look like? First, from like a pen tester, what would a pen testing or an MSSP need in order to be able to use this?
So we have 2 editions. One is the Pro Edition, one is the Enterprise Edition. For a pen test, you can probably get away with a Pro Edition, which is mostly the scanner and not the integrations. And there are
Right.
some other subtle differences that you might want to consider. Like, for example, if you need to self-host rather than SaaS, that would push you to enterprise.
Right. Right. Okay.
And we license by number of assets. Bear in mind,
Okay.
most of our customers are in a scan all year long, and so their number of assets fluctuates a little bit, but not all that
Sure.
much.
I imagine there's a pool, or like up to this amount is this, up to that amount is that.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. And for pen testers, it's a little bit different because you
Sure.
have a fluctuating, like, one project might be super small, the
Yeah.
next one is bigger, and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So we give you a special provision in the license, and that basically is if you we've got RBAC for our all of our organizations, what we call it, but there is a special thing called a project. So a project is not an ongoing scan. It's a
Okay.
think of it as an organization that only exists for 90 days, but it becomes read only after 30 days. So this kind of like describes like, your average security assessment or pen test.
Gotcha. Yeah.
And so for those, you have 5 times the number of assets that you licensed, and you can reuse them. So let me break that down in an example. Let's say that you think you're only going to scan up to 5,000 devices per engagement. Some teams will go bigger and some will go smaller, right? Then you can buy a license for 1,000 and use up to 5,000 in projects, right?
Okay.
And when you are done with the engagement, you delete the project. You can export the results as a JSON. You can and then you can rescan. Right?
Nice.
So that is what most teams use that are more on like on a pen testing or security assessment kind of cadence.
Nice. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'm realizing we are near the end.
Yeah.
But I know there's some questions that I wanted to bring up from my own and some of the others. One question I had through research was queuing scans. Now, my understanding is once you've scanned, you now have that inventory. So how often do you need to scan a network?
It really depends on your use case. Most customers scan once a week, some once a month, some once a day. I think continual scanning is there's few use cases where you actually need that. And when you set up a scan, it's quite easy to where is the scheduling? Help me if you see it. Oh, scan frequency here.
Oh, okay.
Right. You can pick it here, and you can say weekly, right? Etc. And then you set the start time and so on.
That makes sense.
Nth day of the month, whatever makes sense. Yeah.
Okay. One question we had from Josh Eller, will this work for multi-tenants and MSPs or partnerships pricing?
Yes. So we have so these organizations allow you to do a full RBAC. Let me see if I'm not. I always have trouble finding the screen, but there's a few things. So you have your account. Under that, you have organizations. These organizations have full RBAC of who's a viewer, auditor, admin, user, etc. And you also have these parent settings that we just added in the recent release, where you inherit. You can basically stack organizations, and
very nice.
You inherit the privileges. And on the team, you maybe it's on the team level where you set this up. I don't know. Maybe I'm not a super admin. That's why I don't see it on this demo instance here.
Sure.
But you can.
But it is a possibility. It's
set up
something
RBAC,
that can be done. And then, do you all have
also invite a user from another organization? So let's say you're a security consultant and you get invited to somebody else's org or to multiple orgs. That works too. So an account is not like a user is not limited to one account.
Okay. This question came across are the insights through TCP? And then what other protocols do you use heavily?
Yeah, TCP, UDP, and some of the Linux flavors, we don't want to send malformed IP traffic.
Right.
And so we're looking at all
Very
sorts
careful.
of things of how we can identify things. So we don't sniff all of the network traffic, but we sniff the network traffic that comes back from what we send. And so we see things like the TCP window size and those kind of things. So
nice.
Some of the Linux flavors only have a different TCP window size, but everything else in the scan is identical, right? So we do it in that. For other ones, there are certain attributes that we find in all Linux flavors except that one, right? So it's think of it as like a data science approach. We scan all sorts of things, and then we say, all right, like what's different? What behaves differently with this one? And so we look for a lot of different data in the breadcrumbs.
Nice.
An interesting one. I want to show this one because it's so fun. And I'm going to have to go to the external org for this one. So we can remotely fingerprint AV endpoints. So here, for example, this is scanned over the internet. And let me just pick a box here. This is scanned over the internet. Is that a box that we scanned over the internet? Yeah. Okay, it is. So we do not have credentials. We don't know who this box belongs to, anything. But we are able to find that this box uses Kaspersky as an antivirus. Right?
Wow.
So, and this is, I think it's 135 TCP that's giving up that information, right? So we look really deep in a lot of different attributes. Like a lot of this is gobbledygook, not only to you, but also to me.
Right.
But we basically collect everything we can, and then we look for signal in the noise.
Yeah. That's awesome. Chris, I want to go longer. I'm limited on time. I would love to have you back in the future if you're interested. And
absolutely.
Folks, if you've got questions that you want answered during that time, shoot them over to me, Joshua at newvillage.org, and I will collect those and have them ready to go if we do this again in the future, or I'll just ping Chris, and maybe if we can't do a live stream, at least we'll record something. We'll figure it out. But shoot those questions to me. Chris, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you. And if folks have questions right now, they can also just Chris_Kirsch on Twitter, on Mastodon, and Chris Kirsch on LinkedIn. Pretty easy to find. So you can just either at me or DM me or connect to me or whatever the platform allows.
And Chris is putting out lots of content almost every day on LinkedIn. I'm finding a lot of it super helpful. There was a lot that I saw this week that I wanted to dive into here. So would love to chat again with you if you have the time.
Really
Thank you for joining me. And I hope viewers, you all got something useful out of this. Thank you for tuning in for this episode of Java with Josh, and you have a great rest of your week.
Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.